Hello. It's the first time I've used a microphone for this, so kind of fun. Welcome to the Hale Speaker Series. This is our 15th year. When you go out the door on the, what would you call those, Jen? The little racks that give you information. You'll see one of these. Feel free to take one. You also will see when you come into the library, we have a big poster, so that will remind you. But this is our first speaker for 2024, which is our 15th year. We missed 1 year, 2 years. 2 years for, that COVID thing. But we have really just enjoyed, we have had some great speakers, and we do this year as well. So thank you for coming. It is hosted by the Friends, so we thank them for everything they do, Friends of the Library, to make this possible for us. Tonight, our speaker, many of you, it seems, know him, is Jim Kossler, and he told me to make it short and sweet. He's here, living in Westfield, because at one point he was transferred to New Jersey and lived in Somerset. Now, if any of you know Somerset, it's beautiful out there, but there is not a town. So as you look at your children, wanting them to go to school and have a downtown, they pass through Westfield many times, and they just found themselves consistently drawn here. And so they moved to Westfield and raised their kids. And you're retired, right, Jim? Yeah. So they've opted to stay. So I'm going to let Jim tell his story. Thank you all for coming. Turn it over to you, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for all of you for coming. We have been in Westfield for now over 45 years. We came here as the FBI sent us to New Jersey back in 1971, and we lived down in Somerset, New Jersey, and then we decided, well, we got to go to a place, one of these nice towns, and we kept coming back to Westfield, and we finally stayed here. And when I retired, my wife got a job teaching at the school system here, and that went well, and the kids graduated from here, and we can't think of any place better to be than here. So, and I'm sure that's the same way you feel. My job what I'm going to do today is give you a little background on what I did, what I've done for the last 50 years or whatever, and give you some history about the Mafia, the Casa Nostra, that I was involved in for so many years, and hopefully give you an idea of what the status of that is today. So it's a lot different than what you see on TV, but. I think so. I was sent here to Newark in 1971. We spent 8 years in Newark office, and for 2 of those 8 years investigating organized crime. Can you all hear me back there, by the way?
Yes.
Yeah. I was a supervisor for 2 years, in charge of organized crime in New Jersey, and then I was sent to New York. And for 10 years, I oversaw all organized crime investigations in New York City, Long Island, all the way up to northern New York. So I had my hands full, and I'll explain how that all went as we go along. But what I want to do to begin with is to, well, let me finish with my background so you know that I haven't been sleeping for the last. After I retired from the FBI, since I had such a background in working with labor unions, particularly the Teamsters, the longshoremen, the laborers, I was hired as a consultant for the last 20-some years to assist them in keeping the mob away from them and to keep the corruption from growing within their unions. And as we go along, I hope you'll find out that the biggest problem that we had with the mob or the Cosa Nostra or organized crime is their involvement with the unions. And And I would ask you if you have a question about all this, please wait till the end so I can get all this information in. But in any event, I just retired 5 years ago for good. And I spent 7 years as the deputy trustee of the largest longshoremen's union in New Jersey. And it was quite an experience. The last 4 presidents have been arrested. So there are good people in the union, but there were some people who ran it that shouldn't have been. But in any event, that was my background, and that only ended 5 years ago. So let me go back and let me talk to you a little bit about the history of the mob and how you should look at it. Back in the 1920s, during the immigration of people into this country, there was a lot of people that came in from Italy. Of course, back then, they didn't do background checks on people when they came in, just like they don't today. And so a lot of people came in, and in the neighborhoods where they lived, the Italians lived in the neighborhoods with the Italians and so forth. And there were people that came into this country that, you know, were criminals just like they were when they were in Italy. And a lot of them got involved in various criminal activity throughout New York, New Jersey, and so forth. Bootlegging was a big thing. Narcotics gangs, hijacking trucks. One of the biggest things they used to do is the bad guys would come in and they'd steal a car and then find a jewelry store and put the car in the front of through the window of the jewelry store, and then go in and clean it out and then, you know, go off on their own. That was a big thing back then. So there was no organization to it, is I guess what my point is. They were criminals who were out doing whatever they could to stay alive and to make money. And so this was something that there were people who came with them who were much stronger in their thoughts about organizing the activity of these criminals that in 1935, Yeah, we got a technical problem here. No, we don't. All right, in 1935, a fellow by the name of Lucky Luciano, who you may have heard of, he's kind of known. He organized a group of people he was part of a gang. He was involved with Meyer Lansky, who was a Jewish gangster. And they came up with the concept of how they should organize crime, because everyone was doing what they wanted to do and nobody was controlling it. So he got together with other people of his ilk, and they came up with the idea of establishing 5 organized crime families in New York. And also the idea of spreading that concept to other parts of the country. And as we talk along, you'll see how they did that. So he had meetings after they killed a few people that were in their way, and they established this concept of families. They also established the concept of a commission. The commission was to be the regulating body that oversaw the activities of the families in case there was there were arguments among them or territorial problems. This was a way of controlling this activity and keeping everybody on the from killing each other. They also got involved with the unions back then, because at the time, this was after World War II, unions were growing throughout the country, and a lot of the people from organized crime saw the benefit of having a close activity with the union. Unions had money, unions had jobs, unions give out contracts, and so these folks saw this as a real benefit to them to become even more involved. So they established these across the country, and you'll see. I should have had one of my grandkids come and do this. You would have told me what to do. All right. Here's a map of all the families that were in place. There were 26 LCN families across the country at one time. You only hear about the ones that are around here. But there are families in northern New England, there's families in the Midwest. And the way it was broken down through these meetings that they have with the commission, that anything on the west of the Mississippi would be controlled by Chicago, and anything east of would be controlled by the 5 families in New York. New York was always the centerpiece, and it still to this day is the controlling group for organized crime for whatever is left of them. One of the time you'll see that Las Vegas is there, but Las Vegas is considered an open city, and there is nobody particularly there that controls that. Now, the families that we are affected by here in New Jersey are the Bonanno family. There are Bonanno family members that live, I can't say they're still here. I knew they were here when I was doing business. The Bruno family out of Philadelphia, believe it or not, the Bruno family had quite a big presence in Union County and in Essex County with gambling, loan sharking, hijacking, and things of that nature. The Colombo family has a big, the Cavalcanti family, which is over, it was established by Sam Plummer Cavalcanti, had his base of operation in Kenilworth. He used to spend, I don't know if you know where, there's a restaurant called The Water, no, it's not Water, La Grigia. That used to be called Engine Mims. Yeah. And that's where Sam the plumber would do his business there. Of course, he's been gone a long time. The Gambino family has a big influence in New Jersey. The Genovese as well, and the Lucchese's. They all have people who either live here, do business here. Sometimes they live here, they do business in New York. But you know, we're very active around here. They have a code, believe it or not. Through you know, interviewing a lot of these folks over the years, when they start cooperating, well, many of them cooperated over the years and gave us a lot of information that they weren't supposed to give us. But they have a code, and the code is very clear. Once you become a member, you put everything, you put the LCN above your wife, your children, your country, and your religion. And many LCN member has been killed when a boss told him, I want to see you, and he didn't go see you. And sometimes when you refuse to go see the boss, you may not be seen again. Yeah. Well, that's the way they would keep control of people. I mean, once you become a member of the Cosa Nostra, you were that for life. And we'll talk about the code, the swearing ceremony. If you have to listen to the orders your capo without question, include the murders that you might have to commit. You furnish no information to law enforcement. They call it omerta. You must believe in omerta. Don't ever talk to anybody about what you're doing. And if you were part of one family and you were introduced to a member of another family, if there's an intermediary in them, and he knows that you're both members of different families, he will say, this is Joe, he's a friend of ours. If he's not a member, he'll say, this is Joe, he's a friend of mine. So that's how they would communicate from different families. You'll see the structure here in a while is organized crime families were, oh, I got ahead of myself. There's above that, it says boss. So look above that. I did that. Each family has a boss, an underboss, and the consigliere. The boss is the ultimate, has the ultimate control over everything. The underboss is the person who's out on the street dealing with the members. And the capo regime, or I'm sorry, not the capo regime, the consigliere, who is in between the boss and the underboss, he's the counselor. He's the one that gives the boss advice, and who will do something in the event there's problems between the boss and the members. He'll be the person that will settle the problems. You know what I could use? Do you have any water? I'm sorry. So the idea behind this concept is that these folks, once you belong to a capo. If you're a soldier in the family, and if you're a made man in the family, you have a capo. And that capo is the guy who tells you what to do. And if you decide you're going to commit a crime that's going to make money for the family, you have to get his approval. And then he will get to explain this to the people above him. If you're running a gambling operation, which is a lot of these folks do, then how much money you make on a given time, you have to notify your capo how much you've made. And then he's got to get a piece of it, and then it's also passed up the line to the boss. So it's sort of like a pyramid scheme in the sense that but that is how they control things. Now, you as a soldier could not go to another, infringe on another soldier's business. If you did that, then there'd be a problem between you and them, and the capos would then get together and solve the problem. So you can see why this structure is important to the efficiency of the organized crime. Now, of course, if you're one family and you have a problem with another family, then you do something that another family, you went and took money from a gambling operation or a hijacking or whatever of another family, then your boss would go speak for you. And they would have what they would call a sit down. And if it worked out, okay, oh, thank you. Thank you very much. So that the system of having a structure like this was very efficient for them. Associates, a soldier, actually in the original, the capo was part of the word capodicino, which meant that a capo had 10 men under him. So if you could look at this and you would see how many soldiers were there were maybe 10 soldiers. Each of those soldiers had people who worked for them. So for instance, a gambling operation, which is what they like to make a lot of money on, most of the associates are people who just, day to day, they take numbers or they take bets or whatever. They're not soldiers in a sense, but they make their money, and they pass it on to the soldier. And so there's hundreds of those people who go along to keep the operation going. criminal activity, it's anything you can think of, as long as it doesn't infringe on somebody else's. Now, to become a member, and I'm gonna read this to you, if you can read it. He gave me, this was done by a fellow by the name of Vincent Cafaro. He testified before a Senate subcommittee about his time as the #1 guy to the acting boss of the Genovese family. He decided to cooperate with us, and he eventually testified before the Senate Subcommittee on Investigation. And he told us, this is what he said about when he became a made guy. That's what they called him, a made guy. He gave me a holy card to let it burn in my hand while I took the oath. Quote, "If I betray Cosa Nostra, I shall burn like this paper." He then pricked my finger with a pin and told me, "Now you are amica nostra," meaning our friend. "You have been born over again. Now you are a man. You belong to us." From that point on, I was amico nostro, a soldier in the Genovese family, the most powerful family in New York City, and for that matter, the United States. With unions behind us, we could make or break the construction industry, the garment business, the docks, just name just a few. With the unions behind us, we could shut down the city or the country for that matter. And there's nothing for that. That is true. I mean, there were times when these folks had the ability. I mean, the Teamsters Union, if you control that, you can shut down anything. And so that was one of the things that we'll talk about a little bit more as to how much they were involved. During this time period we're talking about now, back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, there was no laws that were governed by established by Congress to affect this kind of problem. All these crimes that these people committed back in these days were what you would call local crimes. Federal crimes didn't exist. They hadn't established them back in those days. So people say, well, how come Mr. Hoover wouldn't let you guys work organized crime because he was afraid you were going to get corrupted? And he might have thought that way, but the truth was is there were no laws for us to bring to bear against them because the Congress hadn't put them in place. A couple of things happened. There was, in 1950, there was 51, Estes Kefauver, who was a senator from Tennessee. He decided he's going to look into this problem. He had big hearings that were on TV in the 1950s, which was a big deal. And he had mobsters come in and take the fifth, and they refused to say anything. And he made a big splash for that, but it didn't go anywhere. 600 witnesses and nothing happened to it. No legislation came out of it that could help, you know, to handle the problem. In 1957, this same group of people, the people that were part of these 5 families in New York, they decided to have a meeting up in a place in northern, southern tier of New York, a farm by the name of, in a town called Appalachian. Appalachian is a little farm town, and this fellow named Joe Barbarosso had a farm there, and he had a lot of people come to visit him. So 2 days and one weekend, 100 guys came in to Appalachian, New York, in Cadillacs, and which are not seen too often in New York or Appalachian. Turns out that there was a very savvy state trooper who saw all these folks coming and visiting this house, and said he went out and gathered up some more troops. And they said, well, who are these people? Let's find out who they are. And they did, and they found out that there were over 100 people there. 60 of them they captured, at least captured and got their names and so forth. Well, what happened with that was that at that point, the federal government, the FBI, became aware of this meeting and started doing reviews of the people who were named or captured or whatever, for detained, and those it was pretty obvious. These were all criminals. That was no two ways about it. And of course, one of the things you do when you're investigating is you try to develop informants, and we find out more and more about this meeting. It was a meeting to settle differences between the various families and to increase some of the things they were going to do, such as labor racketeering and so forth. One of the things they did decide at that time was that they were going to put a stop on any narcotics trafficking. One of the problems, and the reason being, that there was narcotics investigations from the federal government, but it was being done by the Federal Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, which is part of the Treasury Department. And they didn't have a big coverage of this problem. So these folks at Appalachian decided, don't let anybody get involved, and if you find somebody in your family that's involved in drugs, kill them. Because all that's going to do is bring the heat down on us, and we're going to end up having people cooperating with them because they want to save themselves from going to jail. So if we stop that right there, we'll all be better off for it. In 1961, the federal government finally came up with the idea that maybe we better give the federal law enforcement some laws that they can work on. And they then came up with the concept of interstate. If you were to cross a state line, and they always had this with trucking, but with many other things, if you crossed a state line to commit a crime, then the federal government could come in and investigate it. But you could see that that was not very effective, because you have to spend time watching somebody cross a state line and then catch them in the act. If you were lucky once in a blue moon, you were. So that was a step in the right direction, but it was not effective at all. So here we are in the 1960s, and we still don't have any real strong efforts against bringing these people to justice. In 1963, Joe Valachi, who was a member of the Genovese family, was in prison up in New York State, and he thought that he was going to get killed. So he decided he wanted to be an informant, and he reached out to the FBI, and he was interviewed and so forth. And he decided to tell everything he knew about the existence of these families. This is the first time anybody had actually come out and described what it was that the families did and how it worked. And they had him testify in the hearings, but he never testified in court. He never intended to do that. And he ended up spending the rest of his life in jail, and he died in jail. But he was the person who stepped forward the first time, and that was in 1963. It did wake up a lot of people, though. Mr. Hoover decided that we would have a cop hoodlum program. So even though we didn't have a lot of crimes to investigate, at least if we could identify the people who were involved in this criminal activity on an ongoing basis, we could find other ways of neutralizing them. Because in those days, his interest was more communism than it was anything else. In 1970, they passed the Organized Crime Control Act. Come on. Huh? There you go. The Organized Crime Control Act established what they call the Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organization. That's a statute that was developed in order to accomplish the attack the problem of organized crime. what it did was, is it brought together a whole bevy of crimes that the federal government could now use, investigate, to attack the families as an enterprise, as a group. Okay, and the idea was is that it was a great idea. It was a very complex statute. In 1970, it was people looked at it and yep. The judges looked at it and So the Department of Justice at that time, we hired 2,000 new FBI agents. The Department of Justice then said, you know what you're going to do? This crime is very broad. You can use it for a lot of things, but we're going to have you investigate gambling. Because we think that if we curtail gambling across the board, that would take the funding away from organized crime, and therefore they'll disappear. And that was wishful thinking by any means. It was, and so we did investigate gambling. We arrested little old ladies, people on crutches. A lot of people who were involved in it just to do it to make a living. They weren't part of this apparatus, but yet they were making the apparatus work by being, working in the gambling business. As time went on, the courts said no, don't come here anymore. We used to go in some days on a raid. We go out and raid, and we bring 30 and 40 people in, on crutches and wheelchairs, and the court said don't come here anymore. So the idea of solving organized crime went out the window because of we overloaded the court system, and they didn't want it, and they were rightfully so. But the statute was still in place. Now the thing that happened after that was Jimmy Hoffa disappeared. When Jimmy Hoffa, that was 1975. So the statute was in existence for 5 years already, the RICO statute, which you could use to attack a whole organization. It was difficult for the FBI to reorganize itself because FBI agents were trained to be individual investigators of individual crimes. We weren't trained to work as a group particularly, and each of us was expected to go out and catch bad guys and bring them back in. When you are looking at an organization like made up of numerous people, you have to have numerous people to do it. But that wasn't something that the FBI was allowing at the time. But what happened was when Jimmy Hoffa was kidnapped and murdered, he was supposed to be meeting that day with a guy named, what the heck was his name? He was the boss of the local 560, the Teamsters, Provenzano. Provenzano. He was supposed to meet with Provenzano and another guy at a restaurant up in outside of Detroit. He was never seen again. Nobody knows where he is or what happened to him. But the idea was that he was probably murdered because he had gone to jail for 7 years for fixing some. No. He what he did was he had some people testify against him, and so he bribed the people not to testify. He went jury tampering, right? So he went to jail for a long time, and he thought when he got out of jail, he would go back and become the president of the Teamsters Union. There was no reason why not. If he did his time, he could come back, and he was so popular, the largest union in the country, and probably the most corrupt union in the country, that he would come back and take over. Well, his best friend took over while he was in jail, and when he came out, he wanted Frank Fitzsimmons to step down, and Frank said, "No, I like this job." So Jimmy was, and so on top of that, the President Nixon, who had commuted his sentence, also put a provision in that he could not get involved in union activity until 1980. In 1980. Well, that was, he couldn't wait that long. So he decided that he was going to sue the government because they changed their mind on him and put this, they stopped him from becoming the president again. And he decided he was going to tell everybody about his involvement with bringing the mob into the union. He actually did an affidavit to that effect, and they didn't like that. So where is Jimmy Hoffa? I don't know. I know he's not in the Meadowlands. I was quoted in Playboy magazine about that. Where is he? Is he in the Meadowlands? No. In that case, the guy that said he was in the Meadowlands was a guy that was in prison at the time it all happened. So, but there have been so many incidents where they try to dig up places that someone said the body is buried. And people say, why are you doing that? Well, I mean, the fact is that here was a guy who was the president of the largest union in the country, and that people could take him out for, kill him and to take him away because they wanted to, and they could. I mean, it's so interesting to see how they operated. There was a situation back then when Hoffa, when Fitzsimmons, who had taken over his place, when Fitzsimmons died, there was a man out of Kansas City by the name of Roy Williams, who wanted to become the president of the union. He was a big deal in the Midwest. So he wanted to take over as the president of the union. And as it turned out, we had a microphone in a social club up in the Bronx. No, it was in the Bronx. It was in 116th Street in Harlem, and it had been there for a long time. And the microphone was on a guy by the name of Fat Tony Salerno, who was the boss of the guy who I told you who wrote that, told us about the code and so forth. He gets a call from a friend of his, and he comes to see him, and the microphone is on, and the friend tells him that Roy Williams wants to know if it's okay for you, Fat Tony, if I become the president of the union. So that means this guy was in a position, and he did become president of the union, but he had to get the permission from the boss of the Genovese family before he could do that. Now that's scary. And when we heard that, we said, when they talk about how the organized crime has infiltrated the labor union, there's no two ways about it. And Fat Tony at that time didn't give him a yes or no. He just got back to him, and he did. He became the president for 2 years. So that's kind of. But what happened then, and the Bureau woke up, and the Bureau decided that we need to find out what happened to Jimmy Hoffa. So we sent people out all over the country, almost to every union in the country, and to discuss what do you know about what happened to Jimmy Hoffa. And in many cases, the idea or the concept of corruption start bubbling up in a lot of these unions. And the agents and the prosecutors got together and started investigating these things across the board. There were so many cases involving corruption and organized crime infiltration in the Teamsters Union that I went to Rudy Giuliani, who was the U.S. attorney at that time, and I said, look, I think the best way to do this, instead of having prosecution of all these individual cases all over the country, we'll use the RICO statute, and we'll bring the entire union as a criminal enterprise, only sue them civilly. Because that was a provision of the RICO statute, you could use these things civilly. So we did. We brought a case, we wiped out the entire leadership of the union. They all resigned and put in a trusteeship for almost 15 years.
Giuliani was the first to use it, right? Giuliani was the first to use the RICO statute.
Oh, no. Well, he used it, we used it more efficient than that.
Was that the first time that they went after him civilly? I mean,
First time, no,
it
we-
would be a
yeah.
criminal trial, right?
Well, it's the same concept, you're just doing it civilly.
Yeah.
So we removed, in the course of that action over the 12, 15 years, we took hundreds and hundreds of people out of the union and said goodbye, you're not here anymore, because we could prove that they had aided and abetted the folks that were committing these crimes. So I would say that, you know, for the most part, the Teamsters Union has been cleaned up. But it was unbelievable. And the other thing that happened is that we decided that we're no longer gonna just have one agent conduct investigations, or two agents conduct an investigation of a group. We identified the 5 families in New York. We put teams of agents and cops. We had 100 cops that came over from the NYPD. We investigated the hierarchy. We only looked at the bosses. And if any of you saw Netflix Fear City, did anybody see that?
Yeah.
Well, you saw the incidents where we put microphones in people's houses, and we put them in we put microphones everywhere. And court ordered. I mean, we had one big part of the major case against the bosses. Well, let me go back. We looked at every family, and we concentrated on the bosses of the family. And we got convictions on all those bosses and all the people right under them. Did that with every family. But then what we find out is that the 5 bosses, the 5 families, 4 families, let me say that, the Bonanno family, because they were involved in narcotics, they weren't part of the commission. But what they had come up with was a scheme between the 4 major families in New York, that every cement contract that was taking place in the city of New York, that the 2% of that contract was skimmed off and given to the bosses. Only if there was a contract for $2 million or more in New York, only 4 contractors were able to get the contract, because it was all fixed. I mean, everyone knew about it. It just, you're gonna build $200 million or more? You gotta go with this guy. And they skimmed 2% off and gave it to well, it turns out, we had a guy who was we investigated, who was the head of the Cement Workers Union. But he was also a member of the Colombo family. And he was the guy that went around to all the bosses to see to it that they were in agreement with these contracts. And he would, go talk to them in their office. He would talk. Well, he had 2 cars. We put a microphone in each car. He had an office where he would talk. We put a microphone in that car. We put it in his house. We put it on his phone, so we could cover him, because he was just nothing but a continual criminal activity with all these folks. Well, because of that, just because part of that, we were able to bring let me see if it's an indictment of the commission. Every one of these folks from each of these families, as a result of the prosecution of the commission, which was all the bosses of the families, they all got 100 years in jail, on top of what they had already gotten for running their families. Some of them got 40 years in jail for running their families, and then we used some of the same evidence again when they were involved with the commission, and they got 100 years each.
Except Castellano, right? He had a
He got Castellano didn't make it. I happened to be there that night that Castellano was murdered. I was at a conference with all the major people in the law enforcement, and the beepers went off, and I run up to Sparks Steakhouse, and there Castellano is laying down. What was interesting was that he was laying, his body was on the sidewalk, but his head was in the cement. Because they were cement that, where they had, you know, the same contract, they had gotten the 2% off. His head was in that cement, and I thought, they had just cleaned the machines to get the cement up to this high-rise building, and the cement was coming down the gutter, and his head was there. I thought, boy, but all these folks, they got to jail for a long, long time, and,
Are any of them still alive?
no, they all died in jail. So I'm told that I get 15 minutes for you to ask questions. I have more things to say, but I don't know.
It's too big of a topic.
Were you directly involved in the Hale investigation? You said you came to New Jersey in the 70 or so. and
Well, I was,
Mazzano was from New Jersey, right?
Well,
He was a New
yeah.
Jersey guy.
I handled the guy who, well, they're, that was the beginning of us where we put together in New Jersey, we put together teams of agents going after, because they had thought that Hoffa was buried under the Pulaski Skyway.
Yeah.
I handled the guy that told us that. It wasn't true.
And then just a follow-up question is I'm sure you've seen it or heard of it, obviously, but the most recent movie about, I forget what it's called, about paint
The
houses.
Irishman?
The
Oh, the
Irishman.
paint house?
And in that movie, they claim that he was good friends, I guess, with Hoffa, and he set him up to take him to the house where he was
Frank
murdered.
Sheeran.
Yeah, Frank Sheeran, yeah.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of people who see that otherwise.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
did it. Frank Sheeran was a very devout Catholic, but he killed people.
Yeah.
And we think he decided to take credit for that.
Yeah, but not, yeah, he shouldn't.
Jim, let me ask, do you want to talk a little more before you do Q&A? Because
Well,
I want to give you the chance to say what you want to say.
Well, let me, here, these three unions, which you should know about, I mean, I think they're pretty much cleared up now, but these were the three unions that we focused on mostly because they had, the reason these kind of unions were effective for organized crime is because whatever they do on a timely basis. In other words, for them to be effective, when you're the laborers union, when they build a building, all right, the first thing they do is the laborers come in and they dig the hole and they clean it up, all right? Well, if they don't come or if they don't show up, you can't get it done. So what happens is the union comes and says, well, you want to build that building? You know, give us some money and then we'll let these guys work. I mean, there's all kinds of schemes that these people came up with over the years that I can't even keep them in my head. Longshoremen's Association, the schemes with them were mostly because of the suppliers. They had huge suppliers that helped them make their business work. And they would force different suppliers to make payments to the union. In other words, you want 1,000 tires? Go over and see my Uncle Louie. He'll give you a good price, about twice as what you could. And the Teamsters, of course, you know, they were so wild, you know, so many varieties of things that they were involved in. But, you know, transportation across the country, they could have come to an end any time. And it had at some different times. Yes.
Are these unions, are these families still alive, still around? And what are they doing now?
We want everyone to be able to hear you.
Well, that was going to be my ending.
Oh, okay.
No, that's a good question. if you were to look, at the thing that happened, I'll tell you, it was interesting, was when I was ending up my term as being in charge of organized crime, is when we put all these folks in jail. And I ran into some of the detectives one day who were, involved in some of the cases. And I said, well, what's going on? How you guys look? Because I was out of it by then. And they said, well, we don't do anything anymore. There's no labor racketeering anymore because, nobody wants to go to jail for 100 years. And so they're selling crack on the street corners. And these were folks who had been big-time operators in organized crime, but yet they're back to being street gangs. And that's, I think, the case today. Sometimes if you have on YouTube or whatever, and you go and you query Michael Francis.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
All right, if you put his name in, and you'll find Michael Francis was the capo in the Colombo family, who he's a devout Christian. He does everything he can to help people. He sells his experience to whoever wants to do it, but he was involved in all kinds of crimes that he got away from. And but he goes on YouTube and he talks all about them. And he travels all over the world. Sammy the Bull Gravano, who was the underboss of the Gambino family, killed 19 people. He went to jail, got out, went to jail again, got out. He living out in Arizona, and he goes on YouTube and he talks about all the crimes he committed. The point is that omerta's out the window. The idea that you don't talk about this thing, it's out the window. There is no secret society anymore.
It was the glue that held everything together.
It was the glue. Well, that was, we always had somebody that would tell us something, but it wasn't the important part of it.
And I'm just curious, but obviously this is the Italian Mafia, but,
I don't know that everyone can hear your
Oh,
question.
sorry.
And I want
So-
I want other people actually to have a chance, if that's okay.
okay.
Just hold your question, because we have a lot of people. Anyone have a question? If not, I'll come back to you.
I don't need, I have a loud
No,
voice.
We want people in the back to hear. It's not,
Oh, I have a loud
Thank
voice, okay. So, were you ever, personally threatened or death threats or bribed I guess, was that like taboo in the old days and more,
Yeah, I used to testify as an expert witness in lots and lots of trials. And what would happen was I would come in and they would play tapes for the jury, and then I'd tell the jury what these guys said, because, I'd spent so many years with that kind of thing. And one time, John Gotti, and I never had any problems, because when you treat these people like it's business, this is nothing personal, I'm not here to hurt you and your family. I'm here to put you in jail. But don't take it personally. And if you had that attitude, they would treat you that same way. Well, this one case was John Gotti was, by this time he was a capo in the Gambino family, and he had a crew of 8 guys with him that had been indicted in the Eastern District in New York. And they got out on bail. When you get arrested and then you go before you get out on bail, and you can go your merry way until it's time to go to trial. And well, the government said, no, we want him in jail. We don't want him out on the street because he's a detriment to society. So I got called as an expert witness to testify as to who he was. So there are 8 people lined up he's sitting right over here. I'm here and the judge is right here. So I testified as to who he was. He was a capo, he's this, he's that, the informant says this, and so forth. And I'm looking over, and his attorney jumps up and he says, Your Honor, we have to have a meeting to discuss this man's testimony. And the judge said, well, by all means, take 10 minutes. Go out in the hallway and have a meeting. Now, I didn't say anything about anybody else but him. It's just that he was who he was. I look over, everybody gets up and walks out the door except him. Now, And he's sitting over, right over there. And he's calling me, he's mouthing it, right? I can't say it. Wouldn't be allowed to go home. He's mouthing, I'm gonna cut your throat. And I'm looking at him, his face is red as a beet. And I'm thinking to myself, this guy's either dumber than a stump. Because the judge is sitting right next to him. And the judge threw him in jail. I mean, but I can only say that was the one real threat. I didn't take it seriously though, because I just thought he was good.
So, would it be safe to say if someone was involved in real estate development in New York, New Jersey, Atlantic City, Florida, that they would probably have to cross paths with the Mafia from time to time?
Would I say that they would have to?
Yeah.
I mean, today?
Not today. Let's say 60s, 70s, 80s.
Well, some of these folks were smart enough to have intermediaries between them and the wise guys.
Did the name Trump ever come across your desk?
No. No, it didn't. Trump, I mean, I can honestly tell you, I would see everything that came in, and Trump's name never came into it. Of course, Trump would never get his hands dirty, But at the same time, some of these construction things would be in the hands of construction management teams, and they would be responsible for all those things. And these developers, they don't get involved in that. They come up with the money. They give it to the people to do the building,
No, it's okay.
Just wanted to give people a
No,
chance,
I
not make you
understand.
be
That's good.
quiet.
That's all right.
This question will be a little obscure. I live in Mountainside, and there's a guy right across from me on Hale. And like 30, 40 years ago, he was some kind of a mafia bigwig. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Sure. I'll try to take his name. Chip DiCarlo, yeah. Chip DiCarlo lived in a White House right next door to the Holly Hill, yeah. And he also had a place down in where the place they called the Barn is where he would meet his folks.
What was his significance? In other words, who was he?
Was he a big?
Well, he was a very close to Frank Sinatra.
Surprised.
Yeah. He was quite the significant guy in his day, but he got cancer and died. Yeah, mostly gambling and loan sharking. Loan sharking is a big thing with these folks. If you ever want to borrow money from them, don't.
Thank you.
So I actually want to say it's too bad that these were amazing, like almost governments and businesses.
Oh, absolutely.
Too bad they weren't.
That's why
Done for
that's
good
why I
things.
wanted to show you how they were organized, because they were organized themselves just like a good business, in order to stay in business. But the problem was that they mistreated their own people somewhat. And a lot of folks, it wasn't that awfully hard sometimes to get somebody who was mistreated by these folks to come across and tell you what was going on. And with that, we would, do investigations, and we'd go to court and get warrants and so forth. So they brought it all on themselves, thank goodness.
Yeah.
And thank goodness we were able to organize ourselves to do that, because otherwise they'd still be here.
And it does sound like the concept of having the different organizations, like a whole organization to go after each family, was
That's
like groundbreaking.
right, absolutely.
Yeah.
It-
Well, Jim, thank you so much. We have 30 seconds and one more question.
I saved the last, the best for the last. But you mentioned Meyer Lansky, right, who was the financial wizard behind organized crime. Were you ever able to penetrate the financial systems of organized crime, understand where they kept their money and how it flowed into various enterprises?
That's a great question, and no. We, you know, you wonder where they put all that money.
It's Goldman Sachs today.
That's what it could be. Put it in blue chip stocks.
With all the people that were involved in this, including not only the guys at the top, but even the underlings, was there ever a threat on your life during the time of all this?
Not that I know of. I know that a couple of times it was picked up on a, when I would testify in court, that sometimes we would have a microphone that,
Right.
you know, and they'd say, that Kossler, he's gonna get a hold of him someday. But no, you know what, we didn't have a problem with them. Like I said, agents treated them like it's business, it is not personal. And so they really, unless they were a little bit off the wall, they would never bother us. If they did, I don't know what would happen.
Thanks, Jim. That was great. Appreciate it. And please look at the flyer. Next month on Wednesday, April 10th, we have Timothy Rubb, who graduated from Westfield High School. His last job was as the head of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, so he has like an amazing history. He's going to come and talk with us, so think about putting it on your
Freddie, how are
calendar.
you? Good to
Thanks
see
so
you.
much for coming.
Where were you? You were all the time? You were, how you been? Good, you haven't changed a bit. Hey, really. I got fat.